And the Gemara mentioned this argument between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim about a case of Bikurim, the laws of Bikurim, and what happens when a person's tree is chopped down, or if their source of water for their field is dried up. Are they able to recite the praise to Hashem, thanking Hashem for this land that Hashem gave them, if they don't really have all the accessories of the land, meaning the land there's no source of water, things aren't gonna grow, there's no tree. So do they recite that prayer, which is like a prayer of praise to Hashem? So the Gemara said that one of those views fits with our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says that if a person recited the blessing Bar Priho Adama on a fruit tree, he's fulfilled his obligation. Now, if you say that the fruit of a tree, is called Bar Priho Adama, that means that at least it fits with Rabbi Yehuda's view that even fruit trees, the main source of nourishment is the ground, and because of that, even if a person's tree was chopped down, they could recite the prayer on Bikurim, and therefore the same thing would apply to the laws of Brochos, that you could recite a Bar Priho Adama on a blessing on a fruit that's from a tree. Now, Tosfos over here, and I didn't mention this yesterday, Tosfos over here says that the halacha follows Reb Yehuda. The halacha follows Reb Yehuda because our Tana, meaning the author of our Mishnah, or our Mishnah, is this view, and the Mishnah does not say a name, so it's called a Stam Mishnah. A Stam Mishnah means a Mishnah that has zero name. It tells us a law without telling us the name, and that is called a Stam Mishnah. And generally, the halacha follows a Stam Mishnah. The reason a halacha would follow a Stam Mishnah is because Rebbe did not give a name to it, so that we will catch on and realize this is the general view, this is the accepted view. And so he didn't put a individual name to it, or he didn't say any name. He just said that this is because this is the law. And so Tosfos says, you see from our Mishnah says this. Our Mishnah says this law about the reciting a bracha on a fruit of a tree. You recited the wrong bracha. You recited Adama, but you still fulfilled your obligation. Our Mishnah says that, and it doesn't have a name. It's called the Stam Mishnah, and therefore this would be the halacha. Now, the question on Tosfos. Yes, Susan.
You just said if we say the wrong blessing, it's accepted?
Not always, only in this scenario.
Only in the fruit of the tree.
A vegetable bracha for a fruit.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So and Stam Mishnah is different than Tana Kama?
Tana Kama just means the first opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It means that there's more than one view, and you would call it a Tana Kama.
Okay. And
you would call the other view a Tana Basra, the final view, the final view. But Tana Kama does not mean is not the same as a Stam Mishnah. Stam Mishnah means there aren't two views in it. It's one view. It doesn't give more than one view. That's called the Stam Mishnah.
And that's only for the Mishnah. That's not applicable to the Gemara?
Right. right? It wouldn't. You don't have. There isn't such a term, stam gemara. Now the question on Tosfos is that the rule of stam mishnah is not a blanket rule. It's generally that way. But there were times when Rebbe changed his mind. And Rebbe decided maybe that's not the correct way of following. That's not the correct view. And in those scenarios, Rebbe did not always erase his earlier opinion. Instead, what he does is later on, he'll write an argument about it. So it's called a stam v'achar kach Mahleikas. There's a stam mishnah one place, and later he writes an argument in this matter. So in that scenario, what Rebbe is really telling us, Rebbe is the author of the Mishnah, he's telling us that initially I actually was following this view. I thought this was should be the halacha. And now I'm retracting, I'm changing my mind. And it's not surprising. Rabbis are allowed to change their mind, and it's actually an honorable trait that they acknowledge that maybe they thought they were wrong the first time, and now they're changing their mind, and they're thinking differently. They see things differently in a different light, and so therefore there is a concept of a stam and afterwards a Mahleikas, a stam mishnah, which is like a blanket statement mishnah where it seems like that's definitely the halacha. But then afterwards, there's a Mahleikas, there's an argument about this matter. And that is where Rebbe tells us, you know what? I think I was wrong there. And I'm changing my mind. I'm changing my view. I feel that this one is more halachic view. And therefore, now we have to also realize that there's no view that's actually wrong. They're all part of Torah. So I shouldn't use the word wrong, because each opinion is correct. It's just not necessarily the final halacha. It's a correct view, which means in certain worlds, we're not the only world here. There's other heavenly realms. And in certain worlds, the halacha follows different views. And so those views are also correct. But just in the halacha, meaning the way of practice, we follow one way here on earth, and that would be the halacha. So Rebbe could change his mind and say, you know what, I followed a different view, and now I'm changing my mind, and I feel this is the proper view for halacha. Just like we say that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, we follow Beis Hillel, but when Mashiach comes, it does say that we're going to follow Beis Shammai. What that means is that Beis Shammai is not wrong. It's just in this world, the way the world runs, there is a reason, there is a halachic benefit. There's reason to say that Beis Hillel is the more accepted view, at least in today's in the way things are now before Mashiach comes. But when Mashiach comes, Beis Shammai's view will actually be the more accepted view. Yes, Simone.
Yeah, I don't know why this shows up as my grandson's name, so we just have to ignore that. But so two questions about this. So when this happens, it sounded like you were saying it as if Rebbe was arguing with himself, as opposed to he said, I changed my mind and this is how I see it now. So that's question one. Question two is,
no. What does that mean? Arguing with himself? What do you mean?
Well, when you said it was this sort of a Mahleikas, that's kind of like
what I mean is he brings two views in the later part. He brings two views. He doesn't say a stam. In other words, here he says stam. He says a anonymous Mishnah, fully anonymous Mishnah. And then later on, he brings a Mahleikas, he brings two views. That's what I mean. Not that he argues with himself. He brings two views later on. That's the Mahleikas. He'll say, Rebbe Meir says this, Rebbe Yehuda says that later on.
Okay.
Doesn't
And
seem to flow.
when that happens,
Here,
is it noted somewhere? Go back and look at this other view. He said this there. Is there like a footnote that says there's a difference? Nothing like that.
And the reason for that is that my understanding is the reason for that is that the Mishnah was meant to be a subject that you needed to study under a teacher. Because if you were to try and study it on your own, you will end up making numerous mistakes. And therefore, Rebbe did try to make things a little, on the one hand, very concise. And at the same time, you need to have a teacher to be able to clarify these matters. And this way, it's passed down through tradition. And it's not just something you could just pick up a book and decide and come up with, with your own thoughts and mix in your own, mistaken way of thinking. So if this like forces you to have it taught to you through a Masorah, through a tradition, through teaching. That at least that's my understanding. So otherwise, he could have also erased the earlier view, but and then published the final 6 sections of the Mishnah. But he didn't. He kept it the way it is, and he put a Mahleikas later. Now, it also works the opposite way. There's something called a Mahleikas v'achar kach stam. You could have an argument at first, and then you could have a stam Mishnah later. And in that case, what Rebbe is deciding is, I have decided that this is the accepted view, even though earlier I brought an argument about it. I have decided that this is the absolute view that should be followed. So the problem is that let's think about our case. Our Mishnah gave a anonymous view that if a person recites Beirei Pri Ho'adama on a tree fruit, he has fulfilled his obligation. That's what our Mishnah says, and it's called a Stam Mishnah. But there is a Mishnah later in Bikurim, the Laws of Bikram, which is maybe 10 tractates later. And in the Laws of Bikurim, the first fruits, when you have to recite a certain prayer, there it implies that there's an argument. There it would seem that would be, in this scenario, it would be an argument, because that case over there mentions an argument. And if you compare the two cases, it would seem like this would also, it would apply to our case, would be an argument. So what would this be called? It would be called a stam v'achar kach Mahleikas. It would be a stam Mishnah, and later it's a Mahleikas. Now, there is this question, I must say, would be much stronger if it was in the same tractate. If in the same tractate, like we're studying Brochos, if in the same tractate there's a Mishnah that's a Stam Mishnah, and later on there's an argument in tractate Brochos, that would be a very solid proof that we should not follow the Stam Mishnah. Because in the same tractate, Rebbe clearly later on changed his mind, retracted. But here it's in 2 different tractates. One is Bikurim, and we're studying the Brochos. And even though we have an order to our Mishnah, that our Mishnah has a certain order, that first you have Brochos, then you have Peya, Demai, you have a certain order to the tractates. But nevertheless, it's not exactly has to be that way, meaning the order of the Mishnahs that we have is not necessarily the correct order. So the question that I'm asking on Tosfos, and that brought in the commentaries, is that we don't know the exact order of the Mishnahs, of the different tractates. And therefore, you can't really say that this is a stam, and afterwards you can't say that this is a definite Stam Mishnah, because it could be that the Mishnah later in Bikurim was learned afterwards, and it would be called a Stam B'Yachar Kach Mahleikas, would be called a Stam Mishnah that has afterwards an argument. It could be the other way. We don't know. We don't know the real order that the Mishnah should be. So how could Tosfos jump and say we have a Stam Mishnah? This is the halacha. And this is a question that's asked by the commentaries that it seems like Tosfos is jumping to say that this is the halacha, but it's not so clear, because if you the way you learn the Gemara, it seems like it's an argument in a different place, and it might be that Rebbe is retracting from his statement. And I'm saying it's not a definite thing, because it could be the order of the Mishnahs are not the correct order. If it was the same tractate, then we would have a solid case against what Tosfos says here.
Rabbi,
Yes.
couldn't it be that Tosfos knew already what the other tractate is? I mean, he studied probably more than just Brachot. So he can say that this is a Stam because he knows what the other one is.
No, this is for sure a Stam Mishnah. There's no question this is a Stam Mishnah. The only issue is that there is an argument in a different place about this law.
And he knows that.
But so if he knows that, why is he telling me the halacha would follow this because it's a Stam Mishnah? That's not definite. Because if there's an argument somewhere else, then it ruins this entire logic of Stam Mishnah. The halacha follows Stam Mishnah. If there's if there's no other argument about it and there's a Stam Mishnah, yes, I would agree with you. This is a Stam Mishnah. But here you have an argument about it somewhere else.
But he can say it's a Stam Mishnah with a machloket later.
And that means the halacha doesn't follow it.
Right.
That would mean the opposite.
Right.
But
He says this. He says the halacha follows this, and that would mean that Rebbe changed his mind that you should really follow the opposite.
Rabbi, what you're saying, though, if you're saying that the order of the tractates are not set, that means any of those can be the opposite. We don't know which is first and which is last.
Unless it's in the same tractate.
Unless it's in the same tractate. Okay. So any place that appears, though, it kind of puts it this like a doubt or a hesitation, yeah?
A doubt.
Of course, you're going to have that issue. Or if there's not an argument later, and then it's just a Stam Mishnah.
Yeah.
And then you know that that's the halacha.
Yeah, but we don't know which, you have two of them, which is the first, which is the
If it's two separate tractates, yes.
yeah.
Correct.
So maybe Tosafos had some tradition about this, either about this issue or about that brachas came before, what was the other one? Whatever the other one was.
Bikurim.
Bikurim, okay. In other words, was there some possibility that he had additional information that enabled him to make that opinion?
We don't know of any additional information that would change things around. So, it doesn't seem like anything would help. I mean,
Not in this case.
know the order of the Mishnah and say that Bikurim really came before Brachas. We don't, it wouldn't be logical that he would know that. He would, it would be nice if he would have had to mention a source for that, which would be surprising. Now, really, this boils down to a question yesterday, in that I have to clarify because Isaac had asked me about it, and Ezra brought up this question, and that was that our Mishnah, that the Mishnah in Bikurim, what is going on here? Okay, the Mishnah in Bikurim has a anonymous view and it has a view of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, who is the anonymous view? So really, when there's an anonymous view and another view in the Mishnah, the anonymous view is generally the rabbis. It's a plural. And it's not one rabbi. It's generally the opinion of the rabbis. It's a plural. Now, who would the halacha generally follow if you have an anonymous view and a individual view? the halacha generally follows the majority. So the Mishnah in Bikurim implies that who should the halacha follow? The halacha should follow the other view, not Rabbi Yehuda's view, but rather the rabbi's view, the anonymous view, which we called the Tanakama. And according to that, this is not the halacha that if a person, the halacha should not be that if a person recites ha'adama on a fruit of a tree, should not fulfill his obligation. A person shouldn't fulfill their obligation because if the halacha follows the rabbis, the majority. Now, if you want to tell me you have a stam mishnah, fine. But here, they're in different tractates. Because they're in different tractates, we don't know what to do. And it comes out that we should follow the majority. And the majority would be a better option. So the rabbis not only ask on Tosfos, why should the halacha follow Rabbi Yehuda? We don't know where the argument is, and maybe Rebbe retracted, we don't know, it's unclear. But they have an additional point saying, let's follow the majority. And so that adds another dimension to the question. Now, the answer that they give to that question is that since there is a Stam Mishnah that fits with Reb Yehuda, therefore he's not called an individual view against the majority. And there are sources to such a law that when there is a Stam Mishnah that fits with another, with one rabbi, that view is not called an individual view against the majority. Now, based on that, you could say that Tosfos is not really telling us the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, but really what he's saying is, when you're in a case of doubt, you said a bracha, we have a rule that safek bracha is lahakal. You could be lenient because you said a ha'adama, you said a blessing, a vegetable blessing on a fruit. But since there is such a view, and we don't know who the halacha follows, so therefore, Tosfos says the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda, meaning that safek brachas, we're not sure who to follow. So you can follow Rabbi Yehuda's view because we have a Stam Mishnah, which makes his view not a individual view. It becomes he's able to. It's acceptable. It's an acceptable view. It might even be the halacha. And therefore, in a case where you said the bracha, we're not going to tell you go repeat the bracha because we have a rule, safek bracha is lahakal. If there's a question about brachas, a dilemma regarding brachas, we're lenient and we say don't recite another bracha. You fulfilled your obligation with the bracha that you already said because there is such a view and it might be acceptable. So that is one way of learning. It doesn't fit perfectly into the words of Tosfos, because Tosfos does seem to say that this is a Stam Mishnah, and that's why the halacha would follow this. But the point I mentioned yesterday is that even as we said that there's an argument, the rabbis in Reb Yehuda in Bikurim, and our Mishnah fits well with Reb Yehuda, but our Gemara doesn't clearly say that the rabbis would argue. And really, we could say that even the rabbis that talk about Bikurim, they might agree in our case that you fulfilled your obligation of reciting a bracha, even though our Gemara seems to imply that our Mishnah fits with Rabbi Yehuda. It only means it fits very clearly with him, but not that it can't fit with the rabbis, and therefore even the rabbis would agree that if you recited a Avocado Tree Ho'adama on a fruit, you fulfilled your obligation. And the logic behind it is that, at least in the language of people, it is something that grows from the ground. It ultimately grows from the ground. It might not be its main source. The main source is the tree and so on. But this should be acceptable, at least, even according to the rabbis. And even though our Gemara doesn't clearly spell it out, but it doesn't. It also doesn't exclude this option. And therefore, the halacha would follow Rabbi Yehuda, meaning the halacha would follow our Mishnah as a Stam Mishnah, because even the rabbis could fit with it. Okay, yes, Susan.
What fruits and vegetables are they arguing over that it's not a vegetable or it's not a fruit? What
They're not arguing
specifically?
if it's a fruit or a vegetable. They're arguing if you said the wrong bracha on a fruit. You said the
In other
vegetable.
words, it's an argument about the blessing. If you are incorrect,
Right, you
is
said
it
the wrong blessing.
acceptable?
Yeah, now it doesn't mean any wrong blessing works, just because this might work. It's this specific case. You said a vegetable bracha for a fruit. That is what
Okay.
we are talking about, and only that.
Okay.
Yes, Simone.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I've got this point clear. If there's an anonymous view expressed in the Mishnah, that's called a Stam Mishnah, and that's Rebbe, and we
If it's the only view,
If
that's
it's-
anonymous. There's only one view in a Mishnah and it's anonymous, then it's called a Stam Mishnah.
okay, but in the Gemara, if there's an anonymous view, we say that that's the rabbis and that's the majority, and that
Nope, I didn't
has,
say it. In the Gemara, if there's an anonymous view, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the rabbis. In a Mishnah, if there's an anonymous view with another view, that's the rabbis. If there's two views in a Mishnah. Again, don't mix the Gemara into it. Talk about the Mishnah alone. If you have only one view and it's anonymous, that's called Stam Mishnah. If there's two views in a Mishnah or more, and one of them is an anonymous view, that would generally mean that it's the view of the rabbis, in general, plural.
okay.
Is that clear? Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to get to the next case, and this is really a topic of a big debate. What bracha do you recite on bananas? Do you have to replant a banana tree every year? Anyone grow bananas? Does anyone know? The bananas have to be regrown every year. Yes, Susan.
The tree, once it has a stalk, you cut the stalk off. Then at the very bottom of the tree, another shoot starts by itself.
So you don't have to replant bananas
No, sir.
every year. Okay. Now, would you call bananas a fruit or a vegetable?
Why
So-
there?
So this is the topic of our Gemara. Yeah, but it doesn't clearly spell it out like that. It's the discussion of the commentaries, how to read our Gemara. Yes, Yehuda.
Well, I know that the bracha for a banana is Adama.
Right.
Right. But that's because the fruit is
Yeah.
being pulled off with the whole branch. It's
Is
the whole
that
thing.
subject to an argument, or is that a blanket view? Is that the rule? Is that the automatic? Everyone agrees. Is this something that?
Rabbi Weberman, that's the rule.
Well, I'll give you an example where this applies.
Okay.
Why am I at? In other words, you're right. If you just have a banana and you recite Ho'adama, that would be the correct bracha. But what happens if you're going to have an apple in a banana? You're on your diet and you're going to be having your fruit only diet, and you're having two fruits for lunch, you're having an apple and a banana for lunch, and you recite the Borei Pri Ha'etz on the apple, will that bracha, being that you recited a ha'etz, and according to one view, a banana should be ha'etz, therefore you've actually fulfilled your obligation of a bracha on the banana, and you should not go and recite another bracha on the banana, because it will be a bracha levatol, it'll be an extra bracha for nothing, because according to one view, you fulfilled your obligation already. So in a normal scenario where you're just having a banana, your bracha ha'adama is correct, it may be right. But if there's an alternative view that's accepted, that's an accepted view. It's not like a view in the Mishnah that don't follow it all, but it's like a commentary on the Talmud that is also an accepted view. Maybe it's not the main view, but it is an accepted view. And that view it comes into, we have to deal with that view when it comes to having an apple and a banana, because now you fulfilled your obligation of a bracha, at least according to that view. And according to that, you would not go again and say a ha'adama on the banana, because you already recited the bracha for the banana when you recited the bracha for the apple. And Ezra had a question first, I think. Ezra, did you want to say something?
Yes, I know that you can have several types of bananas. I know that there are bananas that grow on trees, and there are bananas that grow on bushes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that might be part of the reason why there are two differing opinions.
Uh-huh.
So I know the bananas that grow on bushes, normally you would say Adaman, but those that grow on trees, I've always thought that those, if you know that they grow from trees, then that should be a Borei Pri Ha'etz.
Okay, that's an interesting thought. We'll have to talk about that soon, and look into that. See if that fits with what we're gonna see in the commentaries of the Gemara. Yes, Ben.
I was thinking to say Adama because you say for the eights too when you say Adama. So if you ate an apple and a banana, you should say Adama, and you're fine.
So Ben has an interesting question. If you're having fruits and vegetables, and we just learned our Mishnah, and we just learned Taisvis that says that the halacha follows this, that if you say Ho'adama, vegetable bracha on ha'etz, you have fulfilled your obligation. So Ben is wondering, maybe I should just recite one bracha Ho'adama and have in mind all the fruits and the vegetables, and I'd only have to say one bracha, and I'm for sure not saying a bracha in extra bracha because the vegetable bracha fits for ha'etz. And that's a very good question. And the answer is that no, that's not the appropriate thing to do, because we are meant to give praise to Hashem for the fruits and for the vegetables individually. However, if you messed up, then it works, but it's not the preferable thing to do. It's preferably you're supposed to give individualized, at least to some extent, the individualized bracha for, the fruits get their bracha, the vegetables get their bracha. If you messed up, then it's okay, but it's not preferable thing to do. However, so, there is an interesting question.
Shahakol is also not good then.
Shahakol is also the same thing. You shouldn't do shahakol and say, I'll just say shahakol on everything.
Yeah.
You're supposed to give individualized brachas. But there is a question that would come up based on this previous discussion we had of who the halacha follows. If you are not sure if something is a ha'etz or a ha'adama, which we'll soon see, be like banana, might have two views, might have reason to say one and reason to say the other. I think papaya might fall into this category as well. I believe there's a discussion about papaya. So if you have a fruit that is a questionable fruit vegetable, what bracha should you make when you're in question? And that would be the case where Ben has a very good point. where maybe you should recite the Ho'adama bracha. Now, what would the rabbis hold? If the rabbis argue on Rabbi Yehuda says that it's his view fits with this Stam Mishnah, and he would say that the ground is the main source of the fruits. In other words, the source of nourishment is the fruits. So even though preferably you should say a ha'etz on fruit, but in a case where you're not sure if something is a fruit or a vegetable, Rabbi Yehuda would say, okay, you can't say the bracha of fruit because it might not be considered a fruit. We're not sure. So say the bracha for a vegetable. But what would the rabbis hold if they argue on Rabbi Yehuda? What would they hold? That a fruit is one category, a vegetable is a different category, and one doesn't exempt the other, according to the rabbis. So what bracha should you say on a banana? According to if the rabbis would argue on Rabbi Yehuda, what bracha would you say on a questionable fruit vegetable? The answer is they would say shahako, because you don't fulfill your obligation if you say a ho'adama, if you say the vegetable bracha on a fruit. If the rabbis argue on Rabbi Yehuda, again, this is subject to the previous Tosfos and how to learn it, how to learn the Gemara, and how to understand the Gemara. Is there an argument between the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda, or do they really agree with our Mishnah, and so on? But if there is an argument, if you follow that way of thinking, then the rabbis would actually hold that you cannot fulfill. If you have a question of a fruit vegetable, you're not sure which one it is. According to the rabbis, you would have to say shahakol because you don't fulfill your obligation if you say the ho'adama. That ho'adama would be Rabbi Yehuda's view, which we are following, and could be because the rabbis agree. But if the rabbis do argue, then they would hold you can't do that. Yes, Susan.
Okay, on this card that I have, it's a blessing card. It says vegetables, and then it says over earth-grown fruits. Then in parentheses, it has vegetables.
Uh-huh.
Tomato.
And it's hadoma.
Right. So what do you learn?
I have no idea.
Well, let me tell you, the blessing, if you translate the words of the blessing, pre-ho'adama, the fruits of the ground. So what they're trying to tell you is that vegetables are actually called fruits of the ground in the Hebrew language.
Oh my God. Okay.
And so even though it's a fruit of the ground.
Fruit of the ground. Okay.
Children are also called fruits in the Hebrew language. Pru ervu, peri. But in any event.
Okay, I have one more question. Second
Yes.
part of the question, all right? The grapes, when they're on the vine, when they're not made into wine, they're considered a fruit because they're on a vine, correct?
Or if they're harvested and you're eating them as a grape, they're also not wine yet. Unless you keep them for a long period of time.
They're
they
fruits.
ferment in the grape.
They're fruits. They're not, in other words, they're not grape juice. They're not wine.
They're fruits.
Fruits.
They're a fruit.
Okay.
Until you make them into wine, they're a fruit. Or grape juice.
Okay. All right.
They are a fruit. So the Gemara that we learned, I think it was 2 days ago, we mentioned that there's an opinion of, there's another Rabbi Yehuda, another opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that talks about the sin of the tree of knowledge. And the sin of the tree of knowledge, he said, was done with a wheat. A wheat, it was done with wheat. That was the sin of the tree of knowledge. Now, according to him, how could you call what is he under? How is he calling that the tree of knowledge? The answer is because he calls chita, wheat, a type of tree, and especially because the Medrash says that the wheat was the stalk was so tall that it was like a tree, like the trees of Lebanon. The Medrash says, and so therefore the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda was that the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda was that on a piece of a wheat kernel, the Gemara questions at least what would happen if you were to say a ha'etz. The Gemara, at least in its thought, it says you would think that according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you said ha'etz on wheat, you might fulfill your obligation because Rabbi Yehuda holds wheat is a type of tree. And the Gemara's answer is the source of what we are going to be discussing. What is the Gemara's answer? Bottom line, page 40a. Bottom line. Heicha mevarchinon barei pri ha'etz. When do you say the bracha barei pri ha'etz? Heicha where the chishaklas leila peri. When you take the fruit, isa legabza, you have the branch. Now I'm translating gabza as Rashi translates it. So when do you say barei pri ha'etz? Is when you take the fruit, the branch stays, it still exists. V'hadar mapit, and it will continue to bring forth fruit, meaning next year it'll give forth fruit. Next page, 40b, we turn the page. Aval, but heicha dechishaklas leila peri, where you take the fruit, Lesei legavza, you do not have the branch, the hadar mapik, that it will give off fruit afterwards. You do not recite the bracha on it, barei pri ha'etz, rather barei pri ha'adama. So the Gemara's
That's the banana.
rule, the criteria of what constitutes a fruit versus a vegetable is something that the branch stays from year to year. That's the way Rashi translates the word gavza. Now, this is where it becomes tricky. The Rush and Taisvis, they learned that gavza does not mean branch. Gavza means the roots. Now, if you translate it to mean the roots, you're going to have a whole different halacha. So if you translate it according to Rashi, Rashi translates gavza means the branch. What comes out is that as long as that you need the branch to stay a branch after you pick off the fruit, and that branch will produce more fruits next year. That is what makes the fruit a barei pri ha'etz. It's called a fruit tree. If the branch falls off or whatever, and it's not going to reproduce fruits from that branch, it's going to need to grow new branches, or if it's going to need to grow new trunk, that would be a ho'adama because it's really growing from the ground. So it depends on the branch. Now, the Rush learns differently. He says gavza means the roots. So now let's translate it that way. When is it called a barei pri ha'etz? When the roots stay and it'll give off fruit in the future. But if the roots do not stay, when you take the fruit off, lessa legavza, you don't have the roots anymore. The roots are not going to stay to give off more fruit. So you do not recite a barei pri ha'etz, rather you recite a barei pri ha'adama. So what that means is that this would be an argument of case of bananas. Because by a banana, the way a banana grows, and again, we'll have to talk about Ezra's example after, but the understanding I have of a banana tree or banana bush is that there is some type of a trunk, but that trunk is not it's not a real trunk. It's actually, there is a stem that grows every year from the roots. It grows, I think, inside the trunk, all the way up the trunk, which is the trunk just stays there. It's a bunch of matter that doesn't really grow, but there's a stem that grows somehow through it every year and then produces branches that give off bananas. And so according to Rashi, banana is ho'adama because the branches are not there from year to year. According to the Rush, the branches, the roots are there from year to year. You don't have to replant the banana tree, and therefore a banana would be a ha'etz because you're not replanting it from year to year. Yes, Susan.
All right.
Correct me. You want to
I
correct
think
me?
it's not, I'm not correcting you. I'm just saying that maybe it's a flowering tree that, because the same base dies and gets mushy and goes back into the ground. The new sprout originates from the original inside underneath the ground. In other words, it's another sprout. Once that has one branch of bananas and then you chop it off, that original stalk dies.
Right. The whole stalk dies.
Different.
Correct. And it does not produce another bunch of bananas.
Right. But the roots stay.
Correct.
So what happens after you cut off the bananas from the tree? That stem dies, and then a new stem grows.
The whole stalk.
Stalk.
Yes.
But I believe that there's a trunk that stays every year, but it's not really.
But it's not this, right.
It's not really part of the tree. It's somehow just this is what I read.
It's a bunch of I don't want to say.
Yeah, this is what I read. Let me tell you what I read. You can tell me if this is true. Encyclopedia Britannica describes the banana tree as a gigantic herb. It has a false trunk, which is in fact an accretion of dead matter. The only organic part which remains from year to year is the root in the ground. This root each year sends up through the false trunk a new stem, which at the top grows branches producing bananas. Okay, so that's the Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't know if they know what they're talking about, but I would assume they do.
There's so many different trees, there could be different varieties.
Well, I'm reading here, it says here, bananas are not real trees, not even palm trees. They're perennial herbs. Banana trunks consist of all the leaf stalks wrapped around each other. New leaves start growing inside, below the ground. They push up through the middle and emerge from the center of the crown. So does the flower, which turns into a bunch of bananas.
So the just because in the world of encyclopedias, in the logic, in the mind of the encyclopedia, that is called a vegetable or an herb, but halacha follows this Gemara right here, and Torah follows this Gemara, and this Gemara says that it depends how you translate gavza, and that's how in other words, our criteria of what's a fruit, what's a vegetable, is not necessarily the same as what the world calls that, but we can take from them the practical side of how it grows. That's fine. That's good. Thank you, Simone, for bringing that. But my point is that when you read these things, we want to take the science from it. We're not taking the terminology of what's a fruit and what's a vegetable. That's we're going to decide how we want to call it, and we're going to base it on this Gemara. And that's this word here, gavza, is really the source of this debate. Ben.
Yeah, I always have a problem with tomatoes, which they call a fruit tree. And I never seen a tomato bush that was that large, but they say that some of them grow large. I don't know. And they call it a fruit. Do you know what you call it?
Well, we recite a ho'adama on tomatoes, and
Oh,
I
they do?
believe the roots do not stay from year to year.
No, they don't.
So that would mean if you follow what our Gemara says, and according to both views, tomatoes would be ho'adama, because either the branch has to stay from year to year, or the roots have to stay from year to year, and a banana and a tomato has neither.
Right, right.
So there's no reason to call it a fruit,
Okay.
according to the halacha of brachas. And I should emphasize that, because there are reasons to say that certain things might be called a fruit regarding other laws, but not regarding the laws of brachas. So, for example, regarding the laws of kilayim, that you're not allowed to plant vegetables in a vineyard, but you are allowed to plant fruit trees in a vineyard. So regarding those laws, there could be scenarios where something's called a vegetable regarding kilayim, but called a fruit regarding the laws of brachos. And the reason I say that is because there is a Jerusalem Talmud that asks a contradiction about a tree called the otad. And one place it says that it's a type of tree. In another place it says it's a type of desha, which is like a herb. And the Jerusalem Talmud answers that when it says it's considered like a herb, that is, it says one of them is regarding brachas and the other is regarding kilayim.
Okay.
Regarding brachas, it was like an herb. Regarding kilayim, it was like a tree. And so there are cases that could have different rules even within Torah regarding the laws of kilayim and regarding the laws of brachas. Okay. So what I'd like to do is, now that we've gone through this Gemara, I'd like to mention that there is a third view. And the third view holds that it depends if the trunk stays. In other words, even if the branch falls off, as long as the trunk stays, that would be considered a fruit tree. So even if it has to grow new branches, and I don't know an example of a tree like that, but if there is if anyone here knows, you could share with us what would be an example of a tree that the branch dies after you pick off the fruit, and it grows another branch and gives off more fruit after every year. So that would be, according to one opinion, that would be enough to be called a tree. And according to the view that we mentioned, Rashi's view, that the branch has to stay from year to year, this would be considered a vegetable. So that's a third view that is in between these two views. So it's either the roots stay from year to year, the trunk stays from year to year, or the branches stay from year to year. Yes, Susan.
The avocado tree, produces the avocado every year. The branch does kind of decay and fall off, but the main branch, where the little branch was, stays, and it shoots out another new little growth and more avocados. But we call avocados
Fruit.
Vegetable.
No. In Torah, they're called fruit. They're considered fruits. In Brochos, the laws of Brochos,
Oh my
it's
God.
definitely a tree. But that is interesting because what Susan is saying is you have scenarios where there's two types of branches. You have the big
Right.
branches and then the small branches.
Right.
And that would be a question of what this means. What happens if the little branch that it grows off out of, that dies out?
It does.
And would this second view, would this be considered, even the first view, would this be considered that the branch lives because it grows, but it has to grow another branch before a little stem before it produces fruit? And you're saying that's different than other fruit trees, is that right? In other words, an apple tree doesn't have that.
I never grew an apple. I'm telling you,
Is that different than
I had
other fruit?
avocado trees, and that's how they
Right,
produce.
fine.
Right.
Right, but what about other fruit trees? Is that the same is that the
have
same
no
as other
idea.
fruit trees?
I don't
Okay,
know.
so it could be all fruit trees do that. That the stem maybe part of the stem dies out, but it grows another stem, but the main branches are still there. So maybe all fruit trees are like that, you know? Okay. Let me read for you in the Alter Rebbe wrote a book on the laws of Brochos called Seder Birchas Hanen. And I'm just gonna read for you the way he writes the law that we just learned. So he says, what is the criterion for knowing what is a fruit of the tree and what is the produce of the earth? In the case of low trees, such as kinds of bushes and the like, some opinions are that any tree which gives fruit from year to year, even though in the winter, all of the tree above the ground, the stem and the branches, wither away, leaving only the root in the ground, which again brings forth the stem and its branches, leaves and fruit in the second year, is called a regular tree. So that is the opinion that I quoted by the Rush. And one says on its fruit, the bracha Borei Pri Ha'etz. Others disagree in this and say that since the entire stem wastes away in the winter and grows again from its root, it is called produce of the earth as far as the bracha is concerned. So we've got two views in a case of, at least at this point, is the root good enough? A further opinion is that even if the stem remains standing the entire winter and only the branches fall away in the winter and grow again in the summer from the trunk, bringing forth leaves and fruit, the fruits do not have the status to warrant the bracha Borei Pri Ha'etz. In the first instance, one should heed this last opinion and say, also where the stem remains standing, the bracha Borei Pri Ha'adam. If, however, one said the bracha Borei Pri Ha'etz, even on fruits of a tree which loses its entire stem and branches in the winter, leaving only the root, one has after the event fulfilled one's obligation. So let me go over this. The first point that he mentioned, the first opinion, was that as long as the roots stay, that is considered a tree. Then he said the other view, that if the trunk withers away, that is ho'adama, you would need the trunk to be a fruit. And then a further opinion was that even if the trunk remains, but the branches fall away, that already is not a fruit. And so you've got these three opinions, and preferably,
Chicken, and when they get dull for $5,
This is for you to say, Adama.
sharpen them up.
sorry, we just
So I just pick them up.
mute everyone here. I'm sorry, there was noise. So what comes out is that he advises, the Alter Rebbe advises us to say, to follow their words in a preferable state and to say ha'adama. But if one recited a bar priya eitz, even on a fruit, on a tree, that the entire trunk and leaves die out, and all it has is the roots, you have fulfilled your obligation b'di'evet after the fact. So really you should say, the example here is the bananas is of course the simple example that according to one opinion, the banana should be ha'etz because the roots stay, but according to two opinions, the banana should be ha'adama because the stem dies out, which is like the trunk. In other words, we're not talking about the false trunk, we're talking about the real trunk, and the branches die out. And so that would be reason that would be two opinions that say ha'adama on bananas, and one opinion says ha'etz. But what does come out from this is in that scenario where you're eating an apple and a banana, if you recite the bracha on the apple, you have fulfilled your obligation for the banana because there is one view that says the banana is ha'etz. And so the preferable thing to do would be to recite the banana, the bracha on the banana first, and eat the banana first, and then recite a ha'etz on the apple.